When the refugee crisis in Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere is discussed in the U.S. media, it's often portrayed simply as masses of people fleeing the violence of groups like ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Al-Shabaab. But U.S. military actions, including the intense bombings that have taken place in a number of countries under both President Obama and President Trump, have played a major role in creating the conditions that have forced so many people to flee. Not just ISIS, not just Al-Qaeda, but the United States government. So too has the U.S. government and corporate support for dictators around the world, support for repressive security forces, and this massive flow of arms sales, both illicit and perfectly legal. Add to this, then, the increasingly deadly role that Russian forces are playing, particularly in Syria, and the world is witnessing a horrifying spike in the number of people documented to have been forcibly displaced from their homes. More than 65 million people, according to the United Nations. From Syria to South Sudan and Central America's Northern Triangle, more people than ever are fleeing violence, persecution, human rights abuses that are caused by their own governments, by terror groups, and by outside forces, like the United States or Iran or Russia. They're also escaping the sometimes lethal impact of climate change. At the same time, political powers across the world, including in the United States and Europe, are building more walls or proposing the building of more walls, implementing harsh anti-immigrant and anti-refugee policies. At the same time, far-right politicians are using the refugee crisis to incite xenophobic fears, which then can lead to hate crimes. Chinese artist and human rights activist Ai Weiwei has spent his entire adult life under the watch of Chinese intelligence and security forces, and he's widely viewed as one of the most well-known dissidents in China. Ai Weiwei has a new film out that paints a harrowing portrait of the scale of these mass migrations that we're witnessing. The film is called Human Flow, and he timed the film's release with a gigantic public installation of his artworks throughout New York City. It's called Good Fences Make Good Neighbors. From a golden cage in New York Central Park to fences erected at bus stops and 200 photographs from refugee camps, Ai Weiwei's migrant-themed works around New York City force their way into high-traffic areas to disrupt the flow of people. Well, Intercepted's production assistant Elise Swain spoke to onlookers at one of those installations in Washington Square Park. Here's what people had to say about what they saw and felt being next to the artwork.
So it looks like a giant bird cage in the middle of the Washington Square Park arch. And at the bottom of the birdcage, about halfway through in the center, is a cutout mirrored on the inside.
It's really beautiful. I think when you stand back, it does look like two people for me personally.
To me, it looks like maybe two people or maybe one person with a backpack on.
Like this nice silhouette if he was a human being or more of one human being walking like in a tunnel all together. We all like squeezing it coming through.
When you go inside it, you see a reflection, but you're like you're distorted.
But I think that reflection is pretty cool in terms of not only us feeling like these other people who are going through hell in their countries.
This is the age of people like putting fences to prevent people from like crossing borders.
And have to be in a cage for some reason as a protection of this crazy world we're living in.
Confinement. That's what I think the cage is, because I've been in cages before. So
it's not a good feeling.
Hell no.
Ai Weiwei's new film, Human Flow, is playing in cities across the United States and will soon be launching globally. And he joins us now. Ai Weiwei, welcome to Intercepted.
Thank you.
This is such an important film. I don't think I've ever seen a film that has portrayed in a human way the idea of numbers and mass forced migration. When you set out to make this film, was that part of what you were trying to make real to people who are not there?
At the very beginning, I was very frustrated by situation and have a almost no knowledge about what a refugee is about. So I jumped in, started with my iPhone to shooting the people get off the shore from the Syria war. And I realized this is going to be a large task to take. And, it's with such a complexity.
This extraordinary event that has unfolded has also impacted Europe in many ways. We're here right now on Lesbos Island. This is the point where 500,000 people, most of them refugees, set foot and entered Europe. And an extraordinary way that people have been coming through. And just the last year alone, over 1 million have come to Europe through the Mediterranean Sea. And although these are movements that we haven't seen in decades, in fact, it hasn't been since the Second World War that so many have fled and come to Europe. It's still something that we need to consider in the global context where so many millions are actually displaced.
So it ended up we traveled in 23 nations, 40 camps, and interviewed 600 people. And come out 900 hours of footage. And the situation grows very dramatically. You have to do several locations at the same time.
Now, the film doesn't really have recurring characters. You return to the scene, for instance, on the Macedonian border. How did you decide how to tell that story?
I guess most refugee films are really focused on an individual character or a family or, a story. As artists, you can have a painting, or you can have a photograph, or you can have something, more abstract, or in between. Sometimes it gets very large scale, and sometimes very intimate details. So it's a collage. I would say it's like a broken mirror. You have a lot of fragment reflects in angles about the reality.
On a human level, how did it affect you? Not just what you showed on camera, because you're filming with your phone and you're also being filmed. But if you ignore the cameras, just as a human being, what was it like for you to witness what you saw and to be among these people that are forced from their homes?
I was also a kind of refugee. My father was exiled as an anti-revolutionary poet. And I grew up with him in 20 years in very hard condition. So when I met those people, they're so familiar. Whatever they do there, their condition, they're both physically or mentally, can see myself in them or see them in myself. So it's easy for me to communicate and take part of this whole production.
One of the lighter moments in the film, you're buying mandarins or oranges from a guy on the back of a truck, it looks like, or at a table. And my perception of it was that you knew that he was overcharging you, and you kind of, in a very interesting way, negotiated with him. I viewed that sort of as a metaphor for how these people are being ripped off in general. Was that at all what you were doing with that?
Yeah, I think we carefully selected the part and to have myself in. My interaction with them is always serving some purpose. Like I try to pick up this fruit rather than the other one. He's trying to give me someone he wants to give to me. And, it's very much like a selections of refugees in the European process. And also he kind of thought my money could be fake. He looked at the son to examine the money. So all those things is very little, but it shows a quality or intention about this kind of distrust or selectively to always choose in those situations.
You portray in a very strong way by using the Macedonian border when the European Union countries started shutting it down. Talk about that particular camp that you were in on the Macedonian border and the fate of the people that were there? Why did they come there and what happened?
Most refugees, when they landed on Greece is not a country they want to be. They want to go to Germany or Sweden or, all those nations already have more open attitude or maybe better condition for working. So they have to walking across this so-called Balkan Road. So Macedonian border between Greece is a place they're being stopped. They suddenly shut off the fence, the door, and all people, the flow stopped there. So accumulated about 14,000 people for months without any explanation or even with very limited life support. So that's why we paid a lot of attention to that condition.
The officials came here and told them, look, there's no way you're going to get papers to continue. So you're going to be deported. Either you go voluntarily or we arrest you. And yesterday it started with police coming here and actively arresting people. They're very afraid of being brought back. I mean, there's a reason why these people are here.
The president of the United States, he's a big fan of building walls and fences.
And also not only building walls, but also going to push away many migrants has been living in United States for decades or even born here. Many of them contribute to U.S. economy. They do jobs nobody wants to do. And so those people is going to be pushed away by the new policy. And he has this traveling ban also.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
Also, U.S. accept a very little amount refugees. You really think it's a kind of shameful for such a big nation, powerful nation, most powerful nation on the earth, but rather not bear responsibility, do not have the vision, and not to have the leadership in dealing with a humanitarian crisis.
What's your biggest concern right now in China when it comes to basic liberties?
China has been established this new government for 6-8 years, but still they never trust its own people. They never let them to vote. They don't have an independent judicial system, and the army doesn't belong to the country, but it belong to the party. And also, they don't have an independent media. It's always under very heavy censorship in every aspect. And I don't know how long they can survive that way, but they have always been like that.
Are you personally still facing surveillance and monitoring when you're inside China?
Oh, yes. When I'm inside China, I should be the most watched person or under most strongest surveillance possible, because that's what they do, and they still see me as a potential dangerous person.
When you just think about it on a basic level, why are they so afraid of you?
I think I present or reflects this notion of freedom, individual freedom and freedom of speech, and also about creativity are really questionable in this kind of totalitarian society, which really threatens the fundamental possibility for them to stay.
What were your thoughts when it became clear that Donald Trump had won the election and was going to be president of the United States? What was your immediate sort of thought about him?
it's quite a natural outcome of long years giving up a political consciousness in the general sense. U.S. has been, or not only U.S. but also Europe has been in peaceful time for decades, and they enjoyed this kind of huge prosperity, but same times intellectually are giving up true ideas or thinking about what globalization is about. So then, very easy to be used by politicians. For me, it's not a surprise. It's because you can see many places in Europe also have this kind of trend or tendency to have a far-right movement come to power.
When you think about the Chinese government, do you think of it in terms of left-wing or right-wing?
I think they are all-time right-wing. There's no left-wing. There's no left-wing movement in that kind of society because, yes, there's a few figures which reflects this kind of fight, but it can never be a movement in terms of thinking or argument. It's no argument. Whoever comes out is going to be immediately put in jail or, has no chance.
China is such a powerful capitalist economy and is making so much of the goods for the United States, and no one ever talks about the human rights in China. Trump just talks about China's ripping us off financially. But the U.S. economy, in large part, runs because of cheap Chinese labor that has at its center no workers' rights and terrible working conditions. But in this country, no one is talking about that, except here and there sometimes you have it. But artists sometimes talk about it. Occasionally an article is written. But the main focus on China in the United States is, China's becoming very powerful and they're ripping us off financially.
I think this is since not only this administration but previous one same. They enjoy the deals they made with in China, and they profited, or the benefits are huge because it explores those nations who doesn't have human rights. Many things only can be done when the people is in this kind of situation. They ruined partially, by doing this kind of business, ruined the human rights condition, and also environmental, pollution is everywhere in China. Food, water, and education is pretty bad, and the government is completely corrupted. So of course, U.S. is very clearly know that. And they enjoy that,
Right, and it's part of why the United States is able to do what it does in the world, is because they don't care about those issues.
Yeah, which is true. They survive because those nations function like that.
As I've followed your work over the years, I always find it so fascinating that you're perceived as a threat, because it feels like the reaction of the Chinese state to you is like from a different era, in terms of like they're making you more powerful and more influential because they're targeting you. And it's why don't they get that their reaction against you elevates your platform? Are you that big of a threat to them?
I think fundamentally I'm a big threat to any power because I'm questioning their essence of why they're there, and it's very harsh argument and threaten to their existence. But they also sense it because I represent, it's not me, but I represent kind of new intention to make a change.
Why do you like working with your phone as a vehicle for shooting video?
It's just convenient, I think for artists, you conceptually are always very clear what kind of image you want. And also, you think anything can make an image which can be powerful. That doesn't have to be super high quality cameras, which exist everywhere now. But also can be a simple gesture or a close range shooting, because film is almost like a street fight. If you really street fight, you don't need some powerful weapons. You maybe, you grab sand, you use sand, you have a brake, you use brake, and it's not. It's really about that moment and that little thing you have to capture.
When you're in the United States and you're traveling around, what's the vibe that you feel? I'm sure it's different in different places, but how does it feel in this country?
After having back to China from the United States for about 20-some years, 24 years, then come back to Europe and the United States, I think this world are really, we are living in different world. And, if you go to South America, you go to Africa, you go to Middle East, we are living in several very different kind of world. And in general speaking, the people here are quite spoiled because long time lacking of any kind of challenge. And I think challenge is necessary for a soul or nation or individual. Without challenge, we all become spoiled.
What do you think should be done with all of these people that have had to flee their homes in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia? Like, what would a human response look like to any of this?
I think there's several levels things need to be done. One is at the top political level, globally, those leadership, the powerful nations, they should make a decision to stop the war, to stop the famine, which is not difficult. All those wars represents the interests from others. As we all know, if we look at top list of who selling those weapons and to whom, it's just like if you follow the money, then you see how this world is moving. So the U.S. certainly bears a major responsibility in this matter. If you talk about the Iraq war, still after decades, still Iraq is such a broken state and still fighting.
And Turkey, I mean, the United States sold enormous quantities of weapons and military to Turkey to massacre and expel Kurds.
Yes, and Turkey also is a very unstable situation. And many nations, it's not just one or two. And also in Syria, has all foreign involvement in there, so make that war have 100,000 people as casualty and push a few million people out. So if we don't stop those wars and we continuously build arms and selling arms, what do you expect? All those things are made for killing people. I think U.S. has been pulling down the bombs larger than ever.
Yeah, Trump just used this huge bomb that they called the Moab in Afghanistan. They were bragging about how great this big bomb was.
Yeah, so you can see people celebrating those killings. And also not to talk about nuclear warfare, those potential dangerous threat to humanity is always there. If they have any sincerity or care, they should just dismiss all those nuclear bombs. Why we need to have it? Who they want to kill use those kind of devastating weapons.
Whose work right now do you respect or do you pay attention to? Either artists or writers, musicians?
Sorry to say, I am very much interested in the artist. His name is Weiwei. His work I paid full attention to.
All right, fair enough. Ai Weiwei, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Ai Weiwei is a Chinese artist and political dissident. His documentary Human Flow is out now, and his installations in New York City will be up until February 11th of 2018.